Have you ever imagined that a small, almost meaningless decision in a supermarket could shake the foundations of the world's largest economy? A single hand putting back a bag of American apples on the shelf. A family canceling their vacation to Florida. A local festival where Coca-Cola is quietly replaced with traditional apple juice. Small choices, repeated millions of times, multiplied across nations, suddenly became a powerful wave sweeping across borders. It was a silent wave, no banners, no shouting, no marching soldiers, yet its strength was equal to an earthquake. And the epicenter of this earthquake was somewhere no one expected: Canada. For decades, the United States has been seen as an untouchable giant. Its products, its brands, its culture, spread everywhere. From Coca-Cola's red cans to shiny iPhones, from Amazon's dominance to vacations in New York, Los Angeles, or Disney parks, America's soft power seemed invincible. But then, one day, an invisible boycott appeared. A boycott not led by governments, not pushed by armies, but by ordinary people. And that made it far more dangerous. Imagine a supermarket in Vancouver, British Columbia, on a weekend morning. A mother holding her child stops at a shelf of American grapes. She hesitates. The child asks why she didn't buy it. The mother just smiles, shakes her head, and picks up Canadian produce instead. One small decision. But when thousands of mothers did the same, the message was unmistakable. We choose ourselves, not you. Soon, the effect grew louder. Flights from Canada to the US plummeted by more than 70%. American cars sat unsold at dealerships. Vacation packages to Disney World and New York lost their sparkle. Across the border towns, stores that once thrived on Canadian tourists fell silent. At first, Americans laughed it off. Canada can't hurt us, they said, but they missed the bigger picture. The story wasn't about money alone, it was about symbolism. It was about pride. And when the world saw Canada daring to resist, daring to say no, it sparked a dangerous question in capitals across the globe. If Canada can do it, why can't we? And that was the beginning of the domino effect. Canada, America's closest neighbor and most important trading partner, was the last place anyone expected rebellion. They shared the world's longest border, millions of daily interactions, and deeply intertwined economies. But when Washington slapped tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, it was more than a policy. It was a betrayal. Ottawa could have responded with diplomacy. But instead, ordinary Canadians acted. In supermarkets from Toronto to Quebec, people began looking at labels differently. If it said, "Made in USA," they simply put it back. American apples were replaced with Canadian-grown ones. U.S. beef was left on the shelves in favor of Alberta's cattle. Even drinks, Budweiser and Pepsi, lost ground to local alternatives. Retailers saw the shift and embraced it. Maple leaf flags appeared everywhere, printed on packaging, hanging over aisles, even plastered across entire shelves. The message was simple, but powerful. Buy Canadian. And people did. The boycott quickly expanded beyond groceries. Vacations to New York, Los Angeles, and Las Vegas collapsed. Families that once drove south for shopping trips now stayed within their own borders, or chose Europe instead. Airlines reported a staggering 70% drop in Canada to U.S. flights. American cars, once dominant in Canadian dealerships, gathered dust. Customers chose Japanese, Korean, or European vehicles. For U.S. automakers, Canada was no longer guaranteed. But the numbers only told part of the story. The real change was in spirit. Canadians felt empowered. Each purchase of a local product became more than a transaction. It was a declaration that Canada would not be bullied. On social media, the movement gained momentum. Hashtags like #BuyCanadian spread widely. People proudly posted photos of shopping carts filled only with domestic goods. Local TV shows interviewed farmers, shopkeepers, and ordinary families who all echoed the same sentiment. We're not against Americans, we're just standing up for ourselves. By the summer, the boycott was no longer a curiosity, it was a movement. A silent revolution waged in shopping aisles, restaurants, and travel agencies. When international media picked up the story, the world began to pay attention. If even quiet, polite Canada could push back, what might happen if larger nations followed? Canada had shown the world a new kind of resistance, not with weapons, not with threats, but with wallets. And that perhaps was more powerful than any army. If Canada lit the first spark, then Mexico turned it into fire. For years, Mexico had been both partner and punching bag, tightly tied to the U.S. supply chain, yet often ridiculed and threatened from across the northern border. Tariffs, insults, and the looming promise of a wall had cut deep into national pride. And pride is something you cannot tax, cannot suppress. Ordinary Mexicans, tired of feeling belittled, chose their own weapon, not protests in the streets, not fiery speeches. Instead, they made their resistance felt in silence, by changing what they bought, what they ate, and where they traveled. In Mexico City, a mother stood before a supermarket shelf stacked with glossy American apples. For years, they had been the obvious choice, but this time her hand moved elsewhere, to mangoes from Chile, pears from Ecuador, oranges from Italy. She placed them in her cart and walked away. Multiply that one decision by millions, and suddenly the picture changed. In Guadalajara, Monterrey, Puebla, across the country, the same quiet shift unfolded. U.S. goods disappeared from shelves, replaced by produce from South America and Europe. Importers, seeing the trend, began reducing their U.S. orders. What once dominated Mexico's markets was fading into the background. It was more than a boycott. It was a statement that said, "We don't need you." The travel industry felt the sting next. For decades, Mexican tourists had been among the most loyal visitors to the United States. Disneyland in California, shopping malls in Texas, Broadway shows in New York. These were family traditions. But suddenly, flights dropped by 25% in just one quarter. Families turned their eyes inward. Instead of Orlando, they chose Cancun. Instead of Los Angeles, Puerto Vallarta. Instead of Las Vegas, Baja California. Resorts along Mexico's own coastlines reported record bookings. Beaches once overlooked were now bustling with domestic visitors. Why spend pesos in a country that showed them so little respect, when they could spend it at home, or in destinations that welcomed them warmly? American businesses across the border towns began to panic. Shops in Texas and California that once thrived on Mexican shoppers fell eerily quiet. Parking lots that used to overflow with cars from across the border now sat half empty. And through it all, there was no central campaign, no official declaration, just millions of silent choices. A factory worker in Monterrey explained it best. "We don't need to march or shout. We just need to spend our pesos differently." That's the language America understands. For U.S. companies, the shock was real. Beef exports declined. Fruit sat unsold. Even the fast food chains that had taken root across Mexico saw thinner crowds. One McDonald's franchise owner confessed privately that customers were openly saying, "Why eat here when we have our own food?" This was not just economics, it was personal. Mexicans felt disrespected, and when dignity is insulted, consumer choice becomes an act of defiance. A father in Guadalajara summed it up. "Every summer I took my children to the U.S., but no more. Why should I? We have everything here. And more than that, we have pride." By then, the international press was watching closely. Analysts in Europe and Asia began to ask the same question. If Mexico, so deeply tied to America, can resist, why not us? From the quiet supermarkets of Mexico City to the sunny beaches of Cancun, a powerful message was spreading. A superpower could be challenged not with armies, but with the everyday decisions of ordinary families, and with Mexico's flame added. To Canada's spark, the fire against America was no longer containable. It was spreading fast. If Canada was the spark and Mexico the flames, then Denmark was the knife cutting into America's pride. It began with a statement so bizarre that it sounded like satire. In 2019, President Donald Trump casually suggested that the United States should buy Greenland. To Americans, perhaps it was a bold business move, the kind of grand bargain that fit Trump's real estate style. But to Denmark, it was nothing short of an insult. Greenland wasn't just a piece of land. It was sovereignty. It was history. It was identity. And no amount of money could put a price on that. Denmark's prime minister called the idea absurd. The Danish people were outraged, not with loud protests, not with fiery speeches. Their response was colder, quieter, but no less devastating. They began to turn away from American goods. In supermarkets across Copenhagen and Aarhus, American products sat untouched. Danish cheese replaced U.S. imports. Carlsberg beer triumphed over Budweiser. European fashion labels were chosen over American ones. Retailers leaned into the shift, proudly labeling shelves with "Made in Europe" signs. This wasn't about taste. It wasn't about price. It was about dignity. A woman in Copenhagen put it simply during a local interview. "If their president thinks he can buy us like property, then why should I buy their products?" A university student in Aarhus posted online, "If they see Greenland as a commodity, then I'll treat American brands the same way." Unnecessary. The post went viral, resonating with thousands who felt the same sting of disrespect. The boycott spread quietly, but effectively. U.S. products lost their shine, replaced by local or European alternatives, and the silence of it made it even more powerful. There were no leaders to negotiate with, no rallies to dismiss, just a nation quietly saying, "We don't need you." Beyond Denmark's borders, the insult was noticed. In Germany, France, and the Netherlands, debates swirled about America's arrogance. European supermarkets embraced Buy European campaigns. What started as a Danish reaction began rippling across the continent. For the United States, the danger was clear. If a single careless remark could trigger an entire nation's pride, what would happen if more countries chose the same path? Denmark had shown that even a small nation, just over 5 million people, could shake a superpower. Not with armies, not with threats, but with consumer choices. It was the quietest kind of resistance. And yet, in its quietness, it echoed louder than any protest chant. The Greenland insult was more than a diplomatic embarrassment. It became a catalyst, a reminder to the world that America's dominance could be questioned, that no nation, however small, had to bow down. And as the dominoes continued to fall, another nation was preparing its own loud response. A nation famous for its pride, its culture, and its defiance. France. If Denmark answered with silence, France responded with thunder. The French are famous for their pride, their history of resistance, and their refusal to bow to outside pressure. When Washington imposed tariffs on French goods, President Emmanuel Macron denounced them openly, calling the measures brutal and unfair. But Macron's words were only the spark. The real fire came from the French people themselves. In towns and villages across the country, something symbolic happened. At community festivals where Coca-Cola once flowed freely, bottles were quietly removed and replaced with local apple juice. It wasn't just about drinks. It was about identity. It was about saying, we don't need America to celebrate. We have our own. Supermarkets joined the movement. Shelves that once carried McDonald's promotions and American snacks now displayed Made in France alternatives. Online, groups flourished with names like Stop Buying American. Lists of replacement products circulated widely. French clothing brands instead of American fashion. European tech instead of Silicon Valley gadgets. French food chains instead of McDonald's. It worked. Surveys showed that 6 in 10 French citizens openly supported boycotting U.S. goods. That's not a fringe group. That's a majority. And the boycott didn't stop at products. Tourism was next. French travelers, once a significant presence in American cities, began canceling trips. A family in Lyon chose the beaches of Portugal instead of Miami. A couple in Paris booked Rome instead of New York. Airlines reported drops in bookings from France to the United States. For an industry already sensitive to shifts in demand, this was a painful blow. It became clear. This wasn't a temporary tantrum. It was cultural defiance. French pride is deeply tied to food, wine, fashion, and heritage. By rejecting American products, people weren't just making an economic choice. They were affirming their national identity. A young Parisian student told reporters, "Why should I drink Coke when France produces the best wines and juices in the world? Why should I eat at McDonald's when I can eat French cuisine?" The boycott became part of daily conversation, part of ordinary life. Professors at universities used it as a case study in consumer power. Newspapers described it as a revolution in the shopping basket. On television, farmers and chefs spoke about how buying local was not just about money, it was about dignity. American corporations tried to respond. They launched ads emphasizing their respect for French culture. They promised jobs, investments, community projects. But for many French citizens, it was too late. Once a product becomes a symbol of disrespect, no marketing campaign can erase that. What France showed the world was simple. Resistance could be loud, proud, and cultural. It didn't need subtlety. It didn't need silence. It could be celebrated, shouted from rooftops, toasted with glasses of Bordeaux instead of Coca-Cola. France turned boycott into theater, into performance, into pride. And in doing so, they inspired others. If Canada had lit the spark, Mexico had spread the flames, and Denmark had made it dignified, France turned it into a rallying cry. We will not be defined by America. We will stand tall as ourselves. And, with France's defiance, the dominoes continued to fall, toward another country where food and culture would become weapons of resistance. Spain. If France made resistance loud and proud, Spain made it cultural and delicious. There were no fiery speeches in Madrid, no mass protests in Barcelona. Instead, the boycott began with a simple question whispered in markets, supermarkets, and on social media. Why buy American oranges when Andalusia grows the best in the world? It was a question that cut straight to the heart of Spanish identity. Agriculture, food, and culinary heritage are woven into the nation's soul. Spain is a country of olive groves stretching to the horizon, vineyards in Rioja, orchards in Valencia, and tapas bars in every neighborhood. Food here isn't just survival, it's pride. The movement began online under the banner, Jiaquan compra local. Buy local. At first it was just posts of shoppers showing off bags of tomatoes from Murcia or oranges from Valencia. But it spread quickly. Soon, entire families were posting pictures of meals made 100% with Spanish ingredients, proudly declaring, "No American products on our table." Supermarkets embraced the change. They gave prime shelf space to domestic produce, plastered signs with Hecho en España, made in Spain. Restaurants joined in, boasting menus crafted entirely from local ingredients. Farmers' cooperatives reported booming demand. What began as resistance turned into celebration. A farmer in Valencia told a reporter, "Every time someone chooses my oranges instead of imports from the US, I feel like they're saying my work matters." A chef in Barcelona added, "Spanish cuisine does not need American brands to validate it. We have everything we need here," and people believed it. The movement spread far beyond groceries. Clothing stores highlighted local designers. Tech enthusiasts promoted European alternatives. Musicians and artists spoke of resisting cultural dependence. Everywhere, the message was the same. Spend your euros on Spain, not America. Chata made Spain unique was how the boycott blended seamlessly with national pride. It didn't feel like sacrifice. It felt like a fiesta. A celebration of Spanish flavors, traditions, and creativity. Young people were especially engaged. On TikTok, viral videos appeared with titles like "One Day Without American Products" or "100% Spanish Breakfast Challenge." Millions of views poured in. Influencers posted tutorials on how to swap out US brands for local options. Suddenly, resisting America wasn't just politics. It was trendy. And when youth culture adopts a cause, it gains longevity. The boycott was no longer just an economic protest, it became a lifestyle choice, woven into the rhythm of daily life. The numbers told the story. Sales of US imports dropped noticeably. Fruit, packaged foods, even soft drinks lost ground. Meanwhile, domestic farmers and brands enjoyed record profits. Restaurants reported increased business after advertising 100% local ingredients. But more than the numbers, it was the symbolism. Spain had turned a boycott into a celebration of identity. And that made it more powerful than any tariff. A European analyst observed, "If Canada lit the match, Mexico fanned the flame, Denmark gave it dignity, and France gave it voice, Spain turned it into a banquet, a feast of national pride." From Madrid to Seville, from Barcelona to Bilbao, Spaniards raised their glasses of Rioja wine, their plates of Iberico ham, and declared in unison, "We don't just resist America, we celebrate ourselves." And as Spain's pride resonated across Europe, the movement was about to find its most formidable force yet, a giant awakening in the East. India. If Canada was the spark, Mexico the flame, Denmark the dignity, France the thunder, and Spain the celebration, then India was the earthquake. Because when more than 1 billion people decide to change their habits, the world has no choice but to pay attention. For decades, American corporations dreamed of India, a massive, fast-growing consumer market, the land where McDonald's built an empire, where Domino's Pizza had more outlets than anywhere else outside the US, where Coca-Cola, Apple, and Amazon poured billions, convinced they could dominate forever. But that dream turned into a nightmare overnight. When Washington slapped 50% tariffs on Indian goods, it wasn't seen as policy, it was seen as humiliation. For India, a rising power with global ambitions, it was proof that America still treated them like a second-class nation. The response was swift. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government signaled defiance, but it was the people who truly carried the fight. Campaigns erupted overnight. Billboards, urging support made in India filled the streets. Online, hashtags like Nandratar Boycott, American Goods, Self-Reliant India, and Made in India trended across Twitter and Facebook. And crucially, it wasn't just politicians or activists driving the movement. It was everyone: students, workers, shopkeepers, families. In Mumbai, a factory worker shrugged off Coca-Cola. "Why would I pay for this when sugarcane juice is right here on the street corner?" In Delhi, a student said, "Why buy an iPhone when Indian phones are cheaper and just as good?" In Kolkata, a mother declared, "For generations we've eaten chapati and curry, we don't need pizza to feel modern." Day by day, American brands lost ground. What was once seen as aspirational became symbols of dependency. The iPhone was no longer a status symbol, but a mark of foreign exploitation. McDonald's, once crowded with young people, saw fewer customers. Coca-Cola, once a staple at parties, was replaced by chai, pomegranate juice, and local drinks. The boycott became more than resistance. It became patriotism. Buying local was no longer just a choice, it was a duty. Campaigns ran ads saying, "Every time you buy Indian, you build India." and millions believed it. The economic impact was staggering. U.S. corporations saw sharp drops in sales. Some were forced to shut down branches. Meanwhile, Indian companies like Tata, Reliance, and Patanjali surged, proudly stepping in to fill the void. But the true power was in scale. Canada had 40 million people. Mexico, 120 million. France and Spain, less than 120 million combined. Denmark, barely 6 million. But India, over 1 billion. When 1 billion people shift their spending, the world economy trembles. Analysts abroad called it America's global nightmare. Not because of immediate losses, but because India had proven a dangerous truth. The United States could be resisted. That no matter how powerful, America could not control consumer pride. A political analyst in New Delhi summed it up. This is not about tariffs. This is about centuries of disrespect. India is no longer a colony. India is a power. And we are reminding the world of that. For the first time, the boycott wasn't just local resistance. It was global shock. From North America to Europe, and now to Asia, the dominoes had fallen. And with India's awakening, the world saw what had been unthinkable for decades. The possibility of a global order where America was no longer untouchable. The giant had risen. And once awake, it would not sleep again. From Canada to Mexico, Denmark to France, Spain to India. 6 nations, 6 cultures, 6 different reasons. Yet all of them converged on one simple action, turning their backs on America. And when the pieces came together, the world realized it wasn't a boycott anymore. It was a domino effect. One nation stands up, another follows. One decision inspires the next. And suddenly, what began as a spark had grown into a chain reaction, threatening the very idea of American invincibility. For decades, America's soft power had seemed unstoppable. Coca-Cola wasn't just a drink, it was a symbol. McDonald's wasn't just food, it was culture. Apple wasn't just technology, it was aspiration. Amazon wasn't just commerce, it was convenience made global. But now, those same symbols had turned into targets. What once represented dreams was now a reminder of dominance and arrogance. A Coke wasn't refreshment, it was submission. An iPhone wasn't luxury, it was dependency. A McDonald's burger wasn't dinner, it was cultural surrender. And when symbols shift, power shifts. Analysts began calling it the shopping cart revolution. Because this wasn't about armies, it wasn't about presidents or parliaments, it was about ordinary people, in ordinary supermarkets, making ordinary choices, millions of them every single day. A mother in Toronto choosing Canadian apples, a student in Delhi refusing Coca-Cola, a family in Lyon canceling a trip to Disney World, a farmer in Valencia celebrating local oranges, a shopkeeper in Aarhus stocking European beer over Budweiser. Each decision was tiny, but multiplied millions of times across continents. They became an invisible earthquake shaking the foundations of American dominance. The numbers spoke for themselves. Flights from Canada to the U.S. dropped by 70%. Mexican tourism to the U.S. fell by 25% in just one quarter. French and Spanish tourists turned away from New York and Miami. U.S. cars sat unsold in dealerships across North America. American fruit, beef, and processed foods were replaced in Europe and Asia. iPhone sales dipped as consumers questioned the symbol it carried. Tens of billions of dollars evaporated. Tourism, trade, tech, food, culture, every sector felt the sting. But worse than the losses was the realization. America was no longer untouchable. Because this time, there was no enemy leader to confront, no government to negotiate with, no sanctions to lift. This wasn't a war fought by politicians. It was fought by the people. And how do you stop a billion silent refusals? That was the terrifying part for Washington. A movement without leaders cannot be pressured. A boycott without banners cannot be banned. A revolution without speeches cannot be silenced. Meanwhile, the rest of the world adapted. China filled the gaps in Europe. Australia exported more beef to Asia. South America found new buyers for its fruit. Nations discovered they could live without U.S. goods. And life went on, sometimes even better. The illusion cracked. The myth that America was indispensable began to crumble. And so the climax arrived, a global realization that the age of American monopoly might be over. A new chapter was opening. Not with gunfire or treaties, but with grocery carts, travel bookings, and consumer pride. The question now hung in the air, heavier than ever. Was this just a passing storm, or was it the beginning of a new world order? The world has changed. What began as a few hesitant choices in Canadian supermarkets grew into a storm that spanned continents. A mother putting back American apples. A family canceling a trip to Disney World. A festival replacing Coke with apple juice. Each action seemed small, but together they formed a tidal wave that shook the global order. No guns were fired. No treaties were signed. Yet the impact was profound. For decades, power was measured in armies, in missiles, in presidents shaking hands at grand summits. But this boycott revealed another kind of power, hidden in plain sight. The power of ordinary people. The power of the shopping cart. America did not collapse. The United States remains wealthy, armed, and influential. But something fundamental cracked. The illusion of invincibility. The myth that the world could not function without America, because now the world knows it can. From Canada's quiet resistance to Mexico's silent pride, Denmark's dignity, France's thunderous defiance, Spain's cultural celebration, and India's colossal awakening, the dominoes fell one after another. Each nation acted for its own reasons, yet together they told a story bigger than tariffs or trade wars, a story of dignity, of identity, of the power of people to push back against a giant. Analysts warn this may be just the beginning. If global consumers can unite once, they can unite again. Against America. Against any superpower. Against anyone who oversteps. The age of untouchable dominance may be ending. But is this the start of America's decline, or simply a storm that will pass? Will the U.S. learn, adapt, and reclaim its position? Or will the world continue to diversify, building a new order with many centers of power instead of one? History doesn't give easy answers. Empires rise and fall. Nations stumble and recover. America could very well rebound stronger and smarter, or it could continue down a path of arrogance, driving more nations into resistance. The truth is, the answer doesn't lie in Washington or Wall Street alone. It lies in the hands of ordinary people. In mothers and fathers, in students and workers, in farmers and travelers. In each small decision made at supermarket shelves, travel agencies, and dinner tables. Perhaps that is the greatest lesson of all. The future of global power is no longer decided only by leaders in palaces and parliaments. It is decided in the everyday choices of billions. So the question remains, is this the dawn of America's decline? Or is it simply a warning shot? A reminder that even giants must listen. The world is watching. And maybe, the next time you pick up a product and check its label, you'll realize history is being written in your hands.